What I want to talk about today, and something that I've been thinking about rather extensively, is why things decay. And in particular, why societies seem to decay. Why kingdoms seem to decay. And why utopias are never necessarily achieved. At least, not for a long period of time, in the grand scheme of things. And when I began to think about this, the only thing that I can relate to this decay and the degradation of societies, cultures, and governments is the idea of entropy and how it relates to the conglomeration of matter. And the best way that I can describe this is in describing a star, or any ultramassive object for that matter, or just anything which is possessed of matter in general. It could be a human body, a tree, a mountain, the earth, our sun, any planet or any star, a black hole, which is possessed of prodigious mass. You see, my presumption, and I want to think about this thermodynamically. You see, if a star conglomerates and becomes a massive object, it is possessed with a gravity, meaning that it warps the space around it, because you see, it is in communication, or rather in direct contact, with the space which is around it, and that space is not merely empty, but filled with things. Because if it wasn't, why would it bend or warp the space around it? Because you see, it's a sort of field, if we can think of it that way. So, in thinking about this, about the sun and how it warps the space around it and creates orbits, you see the planet orbits around the sun because it is more massive than it. And also, the earth itself has its own gravity because you see the moon, because the earth warps the space around it, and the moon is less massive than the earth itself, it falls into its orbit because it is not necessarily sucked into the space around it, but because its mass is not greater than the earth, it cannot escape the orbit of the earth because of the space which is warped around it. At least this is my understanding of it. I'm no physicist, but this is basically my understanding of it. But I want to think about it more philosophically, or sociologically, in terms of why societies collapse, and why utopias cannot be built, and why anything which is good is ephemeral. You see, I think we saw this in the 19th century, with the collapse of feudal society in Russia and the introduction of capitalism. You see, my belief is that society is degradative inherently. You see, a government or a society is reliant on material to sustain itself. You see, it is not syntropic. At least, this is not the way that a capitalistic society tends to function. You see, my belief is that when feudal society began to erode or disappear, What happened was the growing capitalism of the time was calling for more resource. And the decadence of the bourgeoisie was, in its nature, not focused on regenerative ways of living, but solely out of degenerative ways of living, meaning they were taking more than they were giving back. And you see, I think this is what happens with society. You see, when something big is built, and when a society has a desire to grow, it must consume more. And you see, we can think about this when we think about a star and how it is possessed with a prodigious amount of mass. And when something like a star is possessed with a prodigious amount of mass, it must radiate heat. It's extremely hot. And this is a propensity of entropy. You see, when something is so big, it requires nourishment, continual nourishment, and sometimes it takes more than it gives back, but also it must radiate away through the effects of general decay. And I think this is what happens to societies, and this is why I think that we cannot sustain ourselves. And I think this is why societies collapse, because they must. Because we cannot sustain ourselves. I think sustainability is impossible because entropy prevails. And I know this might seem like a nihilistic presupposition, but this is just me merely thinking. You see, if we build a society from the ground up, it is going to eventually get to a point where it gets so big that it requires more and more. You see, with growing populations, you need more food. More food, you need more land. And in order to get that land, you must tear down forest. And on that land, you plant monocrop cultures. And these monocrop cultures are not complex. They are mundane. And they do not promote syntropy. They do not promote more life. They are extractive and degradative. You see this today with farmers having to spray an enormous amount of pesticides and herbicides on their crops, and they have to continually till the soil annually because it is not full of nutrients. And you see, this is a problem. And a system like that is more susceptible to decay because it is not complex enough to withstand itself. And you see, I think this is what happened and what it is going to continually happen. You see, life is something that is ephemeral. It is not going to be forever. Life is complex, but this complexity is only going to last for a very short period of time throughout the history of the universe. Everything is headed towards decay and death. And you see, this is a nihilistic presupposition, and I can understand why this might seem negative. But this is just merely me thinking. But you see, life, for some reason, seems to defy entropy in the second law of thermodynamics. And I think that if we understand this, if we understand why societies decay and stop blaming everyone else and forming groups and instead work together to build more sustainable societies, then maybe, just maybe, we could figure out a way to sustain ourselves. Instead of building these unnatural infrastructures and continuously industrializing cities in a way that is unnatural and in a way that is extractive and in a way that produces more harm than good, and in a way that instigates warfare. Because you see, when you are focused on building an infrastructure which is unnatural, and which is reliant on extracting material from the earth, like metals, lithium-ion oil, things like that, this produces conflict. Because you see, when you have a plot of land or a country and you run out of resource from your country, you do not have the resource that you need to sustain your capitalistic society or country or what have you, then you must look outwards towards another country who has the material that you want. And then you must plot and figure out a way to take that material. And usually this ends in warfare or conflict of some sort. And you see, I think this is what all war is. It's the fight for more territory, more resource, and material to sustain the society that you have built. Because you see, the human species, for some reason, is inherently myopic. In my opinion. You see, we want to build societies which are unnatural and unsustainable. Because, you see, this is our own unpropitious proclivity. We are a species who wants more and more and more, who wants to build more and more and more, and create, and create, and create. Because, you see, we are godlike. And we are, in fact, God. And so is everything else. But we are more consciously aware of this. And we are, in a way, more akin to God than any other species on the planet. Because of our ability to create. But you see, this is our biggest weakness. Because in our overzealousness, we extract too many nutrients and materials from the earth. And this is not good for our own species. Not necessarily for the planet, because you see, I think the planet will recover. I think if we take enough material out of the planet and ramp up the CO2 levels to a point to where the earth is too hot to sustain life, then we will die. But I do not think that the earth will not recover. I think the earth will recover just fine. It did after the dinosaurs, and it will after us. And maybe that is what needs to happen. Maybe after we destroy ourselves, and through the general effects of decay, we are no more, then maybe the planet will come up with something better than human beings. And I don't want this to come off in a way which seems like I'm not a fan of the human species. This isn't necessarily the case. I just think that the way we live is not sustainable. And I think that the way societies are structured is not necessarily advantageous to our survival. And I don't think that we should want to live in this way, because you see, we have built this world, this metal world of unnaturalness. We have built this world where people are eating foods which lack complexity and nutrients. And we are living in a society where the people are dependent on pharmaceutical drugs. We are living in a world where the number one cause of death is heart disease and lack of mobility. Because you see, we are living in a culture where everything is easy and handed to us. Because you see, we have this sort of socialist viewpoint and this belief in equality. And I don't particularly believe that everybody are made equal. Because why would they be? I don't think that somebody deserves something just because somebody else has it. You see, I don't think that that is equality. I think that that is unfairness. If somebody works hard, tirelessly, endlessly, day in and day out, and then achieves something beautiful and masters his own craft, and then somebody comes in and says, well, I believe in equality, so I should have that too, and then gets it. Well, I think that that is unfairness. And you see, I think this is the type of society that people want. They want to live in a society where they do not have to work for things. where they just get everything handed to them. And you see, this is not good. This creates immobility, dependency, obesity, disease. People are not out moving, working. They're not forcing their bodies to make adaptations so that they may survive. You see, it's survival of the fittest. And if you are not fit, well, you get the point. But you see, someone could listen to this and take this the wrong way. They could become malevolent and wish terrible things on other people. But you see, I do not suggest this either. You should beware, and you should acknowledge your own shadow within yourself and not project it outwards towards the world. Because you see, this is what the masses do. They project. And you should not do this. And this is not what you should take from what I'm saying. What I'm trying to say here is that through the general effects of gravity and the conglomeration of matter, and the inexorability of the second law of thermodynamics, I don't know if there's anything that we can do about the general effects of decay. I think that we can build things, but they will eventually subside and disperse. But maybe, just maybe, through our conscious and scrupulous effort, and through an act of syntropy, maybe we can organize a society where it is sustainable. And you see, I think what we need is a reversion to feudalism. We need to revert back to the primitive ways of living. You see, I think this was a more sustainable way of living. You saw that with the Native American tribes in the United States of America. Well, North America. It wasn't necessarily the United States of America, it was just North America at that point. But they lived on the North American land for centuries, sustainably. They were hunter-gatherer tribes, and they lived with nature. They did not fight against nature or wage war against it and try to build unnatural infrastructures. They lived with it. They were a natural part of the ecosystem. Because you see, human beings are a part of the ecosystems, and what we did through the course of industrialization and modernization, what we did was take ourselves out of the natural ecosystem. We put ourselves above nature. We waged war against it. And now what we are doing is destroying it. And we are seeing that. We are taking down forests everywhere. We are polluting the ocean. What we are doing is not good. What we are doing needs to be reevaluated and looked at with a level of pragmatism so that we can look at it in a way that is lucid and rational. We need to view the world and what we are doing rationally and understand that the practices that we have implemented are unpropitious to our future. This, I believe,